All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, one of the best movies ever made and one of the favorite movies of my lifetime, especially my childhood, was Coming to America, starring Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall, James Earl Jones, Sherry Heatley, etc. Not only was the comedy top-notch, but the storyline was top-notch on a myriad of levels. Not only on a comedic level, on a plot level, but also on a historical level. Even though we know that the fictional kingdom that Prince Akeem came from was called Zamunda, you can tell by the jewels that he wore, the animal skins and the way in which he wore them, the crown on his head, that it was actually in reference to the so-called black rulership in medieval Europe. But that's a whole other video for another day. The point being is this: what the director as well as Eddie Murphy were able to very adroitly do was lay out the disparity between not only the lifestyle of the blacks of the captivity in comparison to our people when we were in rulership. It also compared and contrasted the mentality. Remember when Eddie Murphy first came over to America and he got off the plane, the first thing that he noticed were the decrepit conditions that our people were living in, and also the mentality, the mindset that our people had, and how different he was and Simi was, and how they stood out from everybody else. They were looked at like they were so strange because of how they carried themselves. They carried themselves in a very stately manner. And it just goes to show you the difference and how much our people have declined due to being subjected to many of the energies of modern day Babylon. That's how the movie stood out to me on that level. At least that's one of the ways that the movie stood out to me on that level. But it also shone bright in the way in which Eddie Murphy was so desperate at that time to find a woman that he felt like could complete him. It was the main theme not only of this film, but also of his comedy routine at the time. For those of us who've ever seen his classic film, Raw, where he was going through a lot of the pitfalls of quote-unquote relationships, even back then, 30 plus years ago. And they also played out in the film Coming to America because he was looking for a quote-unquote queen. Unfortunately for him, a part of his search was based on simp programming. He had the woman that he was supposed to choose at the start of the movie. The chick that was like, whatever food you like, whatever music you like, that was supposed to be his woman. But his dumbass came all the way over to America to meet a thotty. So brothers, now they're making a sequel. So we're going to see what the themes of the sequel are going to be. I promise you it's not going to be good. Because you cannot put a major motion picture on the screen right now unless you're worshiping women. So I'm pretty sure that the plot in some way is going to revolve around Eddie Murphy having to emasculate himself, or his character having to emasculate himself for Sherry Heatley's character. Or maybe they're going to do something very similar to what the Star Wars franchise did and have him and his quote-unquote queen, played by Sherry Heatley, be separated or be constantly bickering, or maybe she has her own kingdom. Anyway, the crux of this sequel is supposed to be that he has an illegitimate son left here in America from his dalliances when he and Simi came over here to America. I don't know who he possibly could have slept with, because as far as I saw in the film, it was Simi that was running around trying to bop all the broads, not him. He was chasing after the female that he wanted to be his queen, who was the heir to the McDowell's fast food franchise. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see what this sequel is actually about. I'm not even sure if I'm going to go see it in the theater. I'll probably wait to see what the plot line is about. But anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Man, huge news. What do you say to us, man? Coming to America 2 just got their director. Yeah. Big time news. The director is Craig Brewer. That's a guy you might not have heard of his name, but Hustle and Flow. You've seen that movie before. He directed that.
So Coming to America 2 is going to happen.
It's happening. They're trying to get everything together where they're going to do it this year. Start it this year.
You know what, brother? Sometimes you should just leave well enough alone. I think that if you were unable to think of an appropriate plot point or able to craft an effective enough script over the last 30 years, that's probably a sign that you should just leave that film alone, because it is considered a classic. And when I watch television nowadays, I can tell a film that was made in the 1980s as opposed to movies that are made now, which for the most part I don't watch. I don't watch most movies that have been made over the last 10 plus years or so, because the plot is pretty formulaic. I mean, when you watch most films, the plots are relatively formulaic unless you're dealing with a director or a screenwriter who's very creative or who purposefully wants to throw a little monkey wrench in there. But right now, all these films are about having 120-pound women fight 5 guys at a time, and they're trying to indoctrinate the male populace into believing that women are as strong as them or are heroic in some way and strong-minded, and they never fold up, they're not emotional, blah, blah, blah. So to be quite frank with you, I'm not really looking forward too much to this movie, but it does make me very nostalgic for the original film, which I happen to have seen in the theater as a small child. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget the choreography in the early part of the film with the dancers and the interaction, the great chemistry between Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall's character, as well as the hijinks that ensued when they came to America, and how they were very, very astutely able to analyze the mindsets of most of the Babylonian women of America. And as I tell you, brothers, all these women are Babylonian. It does not matter what race they are. Caucasian, black, whatever. They're all Babylonian when it comes to the culture that they've been imbued with. And I thought that the scene of Prince Akeem and Simi in the club is probably the most accurate depiction of Babylonian females and the issues that they have. And that's why my channel is geared more towards the so-called black man, because the so-called black man has to change himself. We have to make sure that, that we're taking inventory of the issues that we have before we talk about the issues with the so-called liberal black woman, because the liberal black woman is not going to change. They're not going to change until the society collapses all around them, because they're two-dimensional thinkers, as most women are. Are there exceptions to the rule? Absolutely. But once again, this film, Coming to America, was a great case study in the dynamics of males and females at that time in the mid to late 80s, and how one so-called black man in Eddie Murphy was trying to understand why it was so difficult for him to find a wife material woman in real life, and he analogized it in film.
2019. That's very.
Let me ask you a question before we get into our next segment here. Like this is going to be a terrible idea, right? This is one of those things. Coming to America is a treasure. Yeah. It is one of my favorite movies of all time, and here we are with 30 years later, and we're going to do the sequel. There's no way this can turn out good for anybody.
I agree. I just don't see it. I just don't see it doing anything but being a massive disappointment. But maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. You never know. But, once again, when I watch that film, Coming to America, knowing what I know, they make it as if Zamunda is a fictional kingdom in Africa. But when you see how they're dressed and how they conduct themselves, it's very obvious that the director knew a little bit about the so-called black rulership in medieval Europe, because that is what their culture was like in Zamunda.
But I tell you though, the sequel, the plot premise seems pretty good. The plot premise is...
You think the only way, like Creed picked up a series way after it ended and made it good.
Well, it was a completely different storyline, but well, good news though. Coming to America, we'll see what happens.
I wanted Anchorman 2, and it did not do well.
Not good.
There's a bunch of sequels.
Dumb and Dumber 2?
Dumb and Dumber 2 did not. It was not a good movie.
No. Well, maybe this will change though. Maybe this will...
Super Troopers 2 was not as funny as I hoped it would be.
I did not see that.
You shouldn't. Don't waste your time.
Yeah. Well, Coming to America. Hey, speaking of coming...
But anyway, the point being is this, brothers, because this segment is about to end right now. We'll see what happens with Coming to America Part 2. But Coming to America Part 1 is a great film to do an analysis of. The thing is that right now on YouTube, when you have 90,000 subscribers, you can't do the same things that you could back when you had 10,000. So we'll see. Maybe I'll take some still shots or some still photos and use some audio in the background, and we'll go through a few scenes if I get the opportunity. But when it comes to the sequel, I just don't see it measuring up, because you're not allowed, unless you just don't give a shit, you're not allowed to be a man in Hollywood anymore. Now, what each individual man chooses to do in America today is up to his own will or what have you. It's just you have to be a three-dimensional thinker. But in Hollywood, they're not going to allow you to make films where you're a man anymore. Like, I watch movies on TV sometimes, and I say to myself, they could not make that movie today. Like Predator, they couldn't make that movie today, where Arnold Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers and Sonny Landham and Jesse the Body Ventura and those guys, they couldn't make that movie today. They would have to have one of these soldiers in the battalion be some 5'7", 120-pound chick with a huge machine gun. And everybody would just have to believe that dumb shit. They couldn't make Lethal Weapon today. They couldn't make Die Hard today. All those films are considered toxically masculine. That scene that I was speaking about where Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall were in the club and all the women were bugged out of their mind, they couldn't make that, they couldn't craft that scene today because that would be considered quote unquote toxically masculine. So for the most part, mainstream films are not even worth seeing unless they have a certain theme that you want to, that you want to address or that you want to analyze. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Peace.